is what people should call a genocidal massacre in the military college. This was used by Assad both in order to mobilize his own supporters, especially the Alawites, by saying that, look, if you don't follow me, that's what's going to happen to you. This guy, you'll be massacred. And at the same time, he also used it for the international community to say, I am fighting terrorism. That's why when he did what he did, although everybody agreed it was terrible, the fact that the narratives of mass atrocities, the narratives of insecurity in this regard to the Alawites and also the international community regarding terrorism were seen as sufficient justification of the terror which followed. Now, of course, in the most recent conflict, it was the other way around. It was the Assad regime which started to engage in massacres and mass violence. And that's why also at the same time when the opposition started to engage in counter-violence, which included some acts which could be classified as terrorism, the cries of the Assad regime of saying, well, look, we are victims of terrorism, didn't seem to wash with both the Syrians or the international community or even the Arabs. And in this regard, we can see how these dynamics work. And we can see how also regimes like Al-Assad has been for a long time staying in power precisely by mobilizing these narratives of insecurity. It was regards to both saying that if I am not here, if you do not accept me, there's going to be worse coming. And we have heard this from Hosni Mubarak, we have heard this from Ben Ali, we have heard it from Gaddafi. All of them, until their dying breath, were saying that if we are removed from here, then Al-Qaeda will take over and the Islamists will take over. And they have been using these arguments for a long time. Now, one question to be asked then, if this is the case, how did the Arab Spring happen? At what point did this narrative lose its potency? And I think a few things have taken place, and one evolution has been in the nature of these states themselves. Yes, the regimes have been using the Islamic threat for a long time as a prop, and for a while they managed to convince at least some constituencies that this is the case. And a lot of people who were frightened of Islamists here in Egypt or in Tunisia, and a lot of, for example, other countries, outside countries, was frightened by terrorism, including our government in Britain, where Tony Blair now, a lot of documents have shown how friendly he was with Gaddafi. They were ready to embrace regimes like Gaddafi rather too enthusiastically. But as time went by, the behavior of the regimes themselves started to alienate some of their potential supporters. And at the same time, there has been also transformation in the Islamist scene. In Tunisia, the Islamists have been entering in dialogue with their liberal counterparts who were disillusioned with the Tunisian regime and also became its own victims in their turn. And they realized that it won't work for them. And at one point, some of them realize that the potential threat of Islamists is a distant one, but the actual threat of the present regime is something which we see with our own eyes. So they entered into dialogue. Here also in Egypt, movements like Kifaya also brought, and later the Egyptian Society for Change also brought together Islamists and liberals. And we've seen the developments in what we called in the Arab Human Development Report in 2004, the black hole state. The state began to contract from a political party with constituencies to a small clique within the party, usually as in Syria and Iraq, to a sect, and then to a clan within the sect, and then to a family. And everybody else felt excluded from this kind of state. So everybody was left out, and then we started to get some action. Now, a democracy as a system of government, and I don't want to go much into that, but one of the main definitions of it is that the rule of the self-government by the people. Now, the people or the demos has to exist before they can rule. And part of the technique which has been used by the black hole state regimes was to divide the people according to sect or to groups or to political or to ideologies. And the refrain of a shab you read or the people want became a cacophony instead of one word, because this part of the shab you read this and this part wants that, and so the regimes could play as a clever balancing act and also have a new role and say it is everybody has to come to us to protect them from the other. So they promoted insecurity between groups, and at the same time then, as Charles Tilly said, the states in this case acted as a protection racket. They create the insecurity and then they present themselves as the challenge for it. Now then, when the rapprochement between the different ideological groups occurred here in Egypt and also in Tunisia, then we had for the first time the demos, the people, a shab you read, and then there was one voice. Of course, we see now that we again have different voices, but that's a different kind of problem, which we can discuss if you want to later. But the dynamics we can see here is that there is usually the narratives of insecurity, or the way insecurity is constructed, is part of the harbingers both of mass violence and of authoritarian regimes. Both are tools. Of course, the construction of insecurity itself is important. The way you do it, we know that there is different ways of narrativizing the same question. Of course, there is no argument that the insecurity exists. If I feel insecurity, it doesn't matter whether this insecurity is real, in the sense that the threat is real or not. For example, the way the threat of terrorism and so-called Islamic terrorism has been hyped and sometimes deliberately manufactured, doesn't mean that, first of all, that terrorism doesn't exist, or that the people are feeling more insecure because of it. But there is always a different way of telling the same story. For example, the arguments has been made about whether terrorism is caused by the fact that, the very fact that there are some crazy Muslims around, and some, as recently also seen films and other things, that Muslims themselves as a problem, as irrational. And in this case, if you have this narrative, this type of narrative, that being a Muslim is always being a potential terrorist, then you yourself become, in a way, feeling that you have no option but to take action to try, for example, as Anders Breivik did in Norway, to try to shoot all Muslims you can, or to shoot the people whom you blame for bringing the Muslim in your country, and ask for all Muslims to be removed from the country, because that's the only way I can feel secure. But of course, there is another way of talking about it and saying, well, yes, of course, there are Muslim terrorists, and they are not all Muslims, and some of them are terrorists because they also have their own narratives of insecurity and their fears and their problems. And if we deal with this, then we can deal with the problem. But if we come back to the Syrian case in this regard, these narratives can also be self-reinforcing. Because if you are saying in Syria that we are, I mean, there's of course different narratives. That's the problem with this, because the Syrian regime would say at one point, we are being targeted because we are the only resistance, the only last resistance for Israeli and American hegemony, and they want to remove this bloc so that the Americans would then take over the whole Middle East, and Israel will be the superpower here, and we will all be slaves to the Israelis and Americans for the rest of our lives, and our children and children will be enslaved. And this kind of rhetoric, of course, tries to appeal to a wider Arab audience, to say, you as Arabs, we are the last defenders of this, of your dignity, of your future freedoms. Come with us. Then, of course, as soon as this sentence finishes, the other gentleman would say, well, this is a sectarian Wahhabi kind of extremist who want to exterminate the Christians and the minorities in Syria, and in this regard, we are appeal here. The appeal is both to these minorities and to international opinion to come and protect the minorities. And for example, yesterday I was listening to the new Speaker of the Syrian Parliament saying that we need to table the International Assembly of Parliaments motion about protecting the Christians in Syria. Then at another level it would say, well, we Alawites and the Baathists who control Syria at the moment, if we allow this to go on, then we will be massacred and we will lose everything. For example, one of the most notorious stories is the way the 13-year-old boy Hamza, who was gruesomely mutilated, and later it became clear, for example, that one of the security guards who masterminded this, and one of them who another witness to this, and he said a rumor came that young people from Daraa were going to the residences of where the wives and daughters of army officers were living, and they were going to commit mass rape against them. So the idea was that in order to send a lesson or to send a message to people who want to contemplate this kind of atrocities against us. We show them, for example, by committing this atrocity against this boy. And then the warped logic goes on and on. But if you are in that frame of mind, if you are in the frame of mind that you are here defending your woman, you are defending your final point of existence, then committing massacres, committing all sorts of atrocities would seem to be the rational thing to do. And we had a lot of discussion in some forums about when you speak about genocide, how do you, what are the best protection against genocide? And a lot of people say, well, if you have courts of law, if you have international criminal court, if you have this, it will discourage genocide. But I think one of the problems is when people are in a frame of minds like this, they don't think of that far ahead. And the challenge at this level is how you can tackle this kind of narratives of insecurity, these narratives of fear, these narratives of horror, let's put this, horror scenarios. And maybe one of the lessons, I think, of the Arab Spring was that there is a way sometimes of overcoming the horror scenarios which people are telling about each other, in the way that the people come together. The people, when people were in the Tahrir Square next door, there were Salafis, there were Christians, there were all sorts of people, and they suddenly realized that they are not, the other guy is not a monster, and that when we talk, when we discuss, we find that a lot of things are in common. And so some communication might lead, and we see also in Syria actually a lot of, one of the interesting things of the revolution, that a lot of Alawites, journalists, even security people, have been distancing themselves from these narratives and saying this is ridiculous, this is crazy. We are, but at the same time, I think there is a self-reinforcing kind of reality in this, in the sense that if you say as a regime that if I don't torture people, then I'll be finished, then you're going to torture people, and maybe these people will be so angry that they are going to commit the atrocities you're speaking about. I think I've probably taken enough time. Yes. So to conclude, there is a kind of logic in the way both, let us put it this way, exceeding the limits, either by regimes or by groups who feel so insecure that they have to do something drastic in order to avert what they see as a horror. And now, of course, the situation in Darfur itself, if we go to Darfur, is a little bit more complicated than this, because there are also several levels of action here. There was the regime, which has own insecurities, because there were always, the regime has always been insecure. And also in an interesting, by the way, comparison with Syria, I remember a few years back, I was talking to one senior people from the Islamists, and we were talking about the coup of 1989, and I said to him, on hindsight, don't you think that the coup was a mistake? Because many of the Islamists now agree that it was a mistake, but this particular guy, he said, no, it wasn't a mistake. And I said, why? He said, I was in Syria in 1963, and at that time,